I'm going to talk about how the SAT does not show, or how the SAT should be abolished as a necessary requirement for college entrance. My first claim is that the SAT does not show how students will perform in college. My second claim is that the SAT is unfair and biased. And my third claim is that the SAT should be replaced with subject tests. Jill Tiefenthaler of U.S. News wrote an article called "SATs Do Not Take the Full Measure of a High School Student." And she said that while it is true that there is some correlation between test scores and college grades, careful analysis reveals that high school grades are still the best predictors of college success, and with test scores adding only marginally to a predictive model that takes into account high school grades. Lynn Olson wrote a study that questions reliability of single-year test scores. And she says that standardized tests are an unreliable measure of student performance. A 2001 study published by Brookings Institution found that 50 to 80% of year-over-year test score improvement were temporary and caused by fluctuations that had nothing to do with long-term changes in learning. So the standardized tests are obviously flawed if small fluctuations can cause such big changes. Excessive testing teaches students to be good at taking tests, but it doesn't prepare them for productive adult lives. The way that the SAT is set up is so that it's more testing about how to take the test, and SAT-2 subject tests are more effective in showing a mastery in certain subjects. Peter Sachs wrote an article called "Standardized Minds, the High Price of America's Testing Culture and What We Can Do to Change It." And he said that the multiple choice format used on standardized tests is an inadequate assessment tool and encourages a simplistic way of thinking in which there are only right and wrong answers. This leads me to my next point, that the SAT is unfair and biased. The multiple choice format is biased towards the male gender because males are, their decision-making skills are more towards right and wrong answers. It's also unfair and biased towards the rich. Chang Young Chung, a statistical programmer, and Thomas J. Sat.Mpg, a sociology professor, both work at Princeton. They wrote part of a book called SAT Wars, and they cite a study that examined national SAT data from the late 1990s, and it showed that 29% of high class and 24% of middle class and 14% of lower class scored above a 1400. So the study found that the study also showed that the students from lower social classes were more likely to have earned a top high school GPA. So, as I said earlier, the high school GPA was a more effective way of improving or predicting how students will, what students' grades will be in college than the SAT. And if the higher class is doing well in the SAT, but they don't have as high a GPA, they won't do as well in college, so the SAT isn't a good test. From 1981 to 1990, there were 3 separate analyses of all the prior studies, or all these studies were published in peer-reviewed journals, and they found that a coaching effect of 9 to 25 points on SAT verbal and 15 to 25% on SAT math were formed. So higher, richer people could afford to pay for tutors and special classes to get coached to get better scores, and this is shown in these points that can be added to the different verbal and math tests. My last claim is that the SAT should be replaced with subject tests. Charles Murray wrote an article for The American called Abolish the SAT, and he said that high school GPA, SAT scores, achievement test scores, were entered into a statistical equation to predict the GPA that applicants achieved during their freshman year of high school. The research found that achievement tests and high school GPA each had about the same independent role. That is, each factor was by itself an equally accurate predictor of how a student would do as a freshman. In this study, they took grades from UC freshman students, and they looked at they broke the students down by college campus and freshman major grades. Charles Murray also said that the SAT's independent role in predicting freshman grade point average turned out to be so small that knowing the SAT score added next to nothing to an admissions officer's ability to forecast how an applicant will do in college, and that the SAT added only 0.1% to the percent variance in freshman grades explained by high school GPA and achievement tests.